Even if you're unfamiliar with Greek history, you definitely heard of Sparta. Despite all the legends, Sparta was indeed a significant power in the Greek world that ruled for quite some time. But what happened to this warrior society, and how did it seemingly disappear from history? Not much is known about early Sparta, but the evidence that we have suggests that it was not always a military state, but was instead an ordinary Greek polis, aka a city-state. No one really knows when the change occurred, but it is likely that in the 8th and the 7th century BC, the Messenian Wars forced its conversion. These wars were almost a century long, and it resulted in Sparta conquering Messenia and turning the citizens into slaves. Some say that as they had now established themselves as a power, they sought to expand more, but suffered defeats, so in turn, Sparta geared their society for war and ended up winning, while others say that it was in order to secure internal stability. Regardless, at around 500 BC, Sparta was a serious local power and had a reputation in all of Greece as the most powerful land fighting force and had fearsome notoriety as unmatched in direct combat. Now, what exactly created this reputation? The most important thing is that the soldiers of Sparta were full-time soldiers, where most men from other polises were part-time soldiers. From a young age, the entire existence of a Spartan man was to be a soldier, meaning he spent most of his life learning how to fight and actually fighting. What enabled this was their society and customs. The state was an oligarchy ruled by two hereditary kings, with a group of officials known as the ephors and a council of elders. The society itself consisted of citizens, non-citizens, and slaves. Interestingly enough, the actual citizens were a minority because only certain individuals could become citizens. Generally, it was the boys that could trace their lineage back to the original inhabitants of the city, and they all had to pass the agoge, the rigorous education and training program that lasted from age 7 until age 29 in various phases. The agoge consisted of military training, hunting, dancing, and many rituals, all with the goal of creating hardened warriors. The others were non-citizens, also known as the Periki and the Helots. Helots were the largest class of Sparta, mainly consisting of formerly free people of Greece that were enslaved by the Spartans. They were similar to serfs in medieval Europe, but were treated even worse. The Helots were mainly farmers and provided for the entire Spartan society. However, Spartans would threaten and ridicule them constantly. Any man that became stronger than he should was seen as a potential threat. Their secret service would constantly assassinate them, and even as a part of the agoge, Helots were hunted down. To put it simply, it was a terrible life in constant fear. Because of this relationship, the state was constantly worried about revolts, as after all, the citizens were only a minority, and all these rituals were created in order to keep them in check. Still, in 500 BC, Sparta was strong. First, they participated in the crucial battles against the Persians with King Leonidas and the 300 and their sacrifice, which granted them legendary status. Following that, they were one of the major states together with Athens, constantly maintaining this Cold War relationship with them, which ultimately culminated in the Peloponnesian War. After nearly 30 years of battle, Sparta finally won, which resulted in the dominance of the southern Greek world. This was a period known as Spartan hegemony. However, only a few short years later, the Corinthian War started, which Sparta didn't end up losing, but it definitely weakened their hold. However, the biggest blow though, and a major point of their decline, was the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC. Thebes won decisively against a full-strength Spartan army, which was their first ever land loss, where they had actually outnumbered the enemy. They never fully recovered, and eventually it spiraled into a major downfall. Greeks ended up marching on Sparta, freed the Helots, and their reign of dominance ended. From this point forward, they would maintain autonomy, but were only a small regional power, and never again would they have the same influence they once had. One of the major reasons for their downfall was a lack of manpower, as following the Battle of Leuctra, the number of citizens is said to have been less than 1,000. So when the slaves were freed, the Spartans didn't have the massive slave labor they once had, and also they possessed a tiny army. From that point forth, Sparta would eventually fade into obscurity over time. They attempted some reforms, making it easier to become a citizen. They attempted to retake land and expand, but ultimately all of it failed. In 192 BC, after the defeat in the Laconian War against the Greek city-states in Rome, they were forced to join the Achaean League, which was in turn a Roman subject. Eventually, Sparta became a free city under Roman rule and would lose relevance. However, the Romans had greatly admired the Spartans, and the city became a massive tourist attraction, sort of like an ancient theme park. The Romans built museums, hostels for tourists, and even the old rituals were replicated for the Roman visitors to see them. At this point, aside from being a tourist attraction, Sparta is now an irrelevant village, aside from the ancient legends, and the only significant mention it would make in the future was when the Visigoths sacked it in 396 AD. Ultimately, there isn't one single event or one single reason Sparta fell apart. There are many different theories, but most historians agree that one of the major reasons Sparta declined was because their culture was essentially unsustainable. The harsh rituals and making it extremely hard to even become a soldier made it incredibly difficult to replenish their forces after a loss, so just a few major battles would seriously deplete their manpower for the next 30 years. On top of this, having the majority of the population being slaves, controlled by a class with decreasing manpower, did quite some damage to the stability of the state. Another influence is that Spartans were also behind on military innovation and were quite a closed-off society. Still, to this day, Sparta is known mainly through the overly exaggerated myths, but also through their historical significance, playing a part in the rise of Western civilization. Thank you for watching. Do check out top 10 most ridiculous weapons by clicking on the screen, and also check out our Instagram page Jordan's Academy for daily facts. See you next time.